Welcome to Big Data Analytics Technique and Tools. Module 5, Security, Compliance, Auditing, and Protection. The sheer size of a big data repository brings with a major security challenge. Data can be easily protected, but only if you eliminate access to the data. The key is to control access, but even then, knowing the who, what, when, and where of data access is only a start. Adequate security in the big data realm becomes a strategic balancing act among these caveats. Nonetheless, effective security is an obtainable, if not perfect, goal or according to IT security expert. The first caveat is access. Data can be easily protected, but only if you eliminate access to the data. That's not a pragmatic solution, to say the least. The key is to control access, but even then, knowing the who, what, when, and where of data access is only a start. The second caveat is availability. Controlling where the data are stored and how the data are distributed. The more control you have, the better you are positioned to protect the data. The third caveat is performance. Higher levels of encryption, complex security methodologies, and additional security layers can all improve security. However, the security techniques all carry a processing burden that can severely affect performance. The fourth caveat is liability. Accessible data carry with them liability, such as the sensitivity of the data, the legal requirements connected to the data, privacy issues, and intellectual property concerns. Pragmatic steps to securing big data. The real challenge may be determining whether the data are needed, a difficult task in the world of big data, where value can be found in unexpected places. For example, getting rid of activity logs may be a smart move from a security standpoint. However, those logs could be used to determine scale, use, and efficiency of large data systems, an analytical process that falls right under the umbrella of big data analytics. The biggest question is, should you keep or dispose of the data in these cases? Classifying data. A classification system does not have to be very sophisticated or complicated to enable the security process, and it can be limited to a few different groups or categories to keep things simple for processing and monitoring. For example, internal emails between two colleagues should not be secured or treated the same way as financial reports, human resources or HR information, or customer data. For example, you may want to divide the responsibilities among technical, security, and business organizations. A simple approach may just include classifications such as financial, HR, sales, inventory, and communications, each of which is self-explanatory and offers insight into the sensitivity of the data. Protecting big data analytics. The launch of big data initiatives is no exception in the data center, and protection is too often an afterthought. Big data offers more of a challenge than most other data center technologies, making it the perfect storm for a data protection disaster. Big data can contain very unique sample sets. For example, data from devices that monitor physical elements on a frequent schedule, surveillance cameras, or any other type of data that are accumulated frequently and in real time. That uniqueness also means you cannot leverage time-saving backup preparation and security technologies, such as deduplication. This greatly increases the capacity requirements for backup subsystems, slows down security scanning, makes it harder to detect data corruption, and complicates archiving. In order for a backup application and associated appliances or hardware to churn through a large number of files, bandwidth to the backup systems and or the backup appliance must be large, and the receiving devices must be able to ingest data at the rate that the data can be delivered, which means that significant CPU processing power is necessary to churn through. Big data and compliance. Whether big data is going to reside in the data warehouse or in some other more scalable data store remains unresolved for most of the industry. It is an evolving paradigm. This means it is harder to understand how compliance affects the data. The concepts of big data are as applicable to healthcare as they are to other businesses. The types of data are as varied and vast as the devices collecting the data. And while the concept of collecting and analyzing the unstructured data is not new, recently developed technologies make it quicker and easier than ever to store, analyze, and manipulate these massive data sets. Add to this the fact that most big data platforms provide little to no data level security, along with the alarming truth that big data centralizes most critical, sensitive, and proprietary data in a single logical data store, and it's clear that big data requires big security. 4 important goals to achieve big data and compliance. Number 1, we have control access by process and not a job function. Number 2, secure the data at rest. Number 3, protect the cryptographic keys and store them separately from the data. And 4th, create trusted application and stacks to protect data from rogue users. Control access by process and not a job function. Server and network administrators, cloud administrators, and other employees often have access to more information than their jobs require because the systems simply lack the appropriate access controls. Just because a user has operating system level access to a specific server does not mean that he or she needs or should have access to the big data stored on that server. Secure the data at rest. Most consumers today would not conduct an online transaction without seeing the familiar padlock symbol or at least a certification notice designating that particular transaction as encrypted and secure. So why wouldn't you require the same data to be protected at rest in a big data store? All big data, especially sensitive information, should remain encrypted, whether it is stored on a disk, on a server, or in the cloud, and regardless of whether the cloud is inside or outside the walls of your organizations. Protect the cryptographic keys and store them separately from the data. Cryptographic keys are the gateway to the encrypted data. If the keys are left unprotected, the data are easily compromised. Organizations, often those that have cobbled together their own encryption and key management solution, will sometimes leave the key exposed within the configuration file or on the very server that stores the encrypted data. This leads to the frightening reality that any user with access to the server, authorized or not, can access the key and the data. In addition, that key may be used for any number of other servers. Storing the cryptographic keys on a separate hardened server, either on the premises or in the cloud, is the best practice for keeping data safe and an important step in regulatory compliance. The bottom line is to treat key security with as much, if not greater, rigor than the data set itself. Create trusted applications and stacks to protect data from rogue users. You may encrypt your data to control access, But what about the user who has access to the configuration files that define the access controls to those data? Encrypting more than just the data and hardening the security of your overall environment, including the applications, services, and configurations, gives you peace of mind that your sensitive information is protected from malicious users and rogue employees. Basic rules that should be used to enable security. Number one, we have ensure that security does not impede performance or availability. Number two, pick the right encryption scheme. And number three, ensure that the security solution can evolve with your changing requirements. Ensure that security does not impede performance or availability. Big data is all about handling volume while providing results, being able to deal with the velocity and variety of data, and allowing organizations to capture, analyze, store, remove data in real time. Security controls that limit any of these processes are a non-starter for organizations serious about big data. Pick the right encryption scheme. Some data security solutions encrypt at the file level or lower, such as including specific data values, documents, or rows and columns. Those methodologies can be cumbersome, especially for key management. File level or internal file encryption can also render data unusable because many applications cannot analyze encrypted data. Likewise, encryption at the operating system level, but without advanced key management and process-based access controls, can leave big data woefully insecure. To maintain the high levels of performance required to analyze big data, consider a transparent data encryption solution optimized for big data. Ensure that the security solution can evolve with your changing requirements. Vendor lock-in is becoming a major concern for many enterprises. Organizations do not want to be held captive to a sole source for security, whether it is a single server vendor, a network vendor, a cloud provider, or a platform. The flexibility to migrate between cloud providers and model based on changing business needs is a requirement, and this is no different with big data technologies. When evaluating security, you should consider a solution that is platform agnostic and can work with any big data file system or database, including Hadoop, Cassandra, and MongoDB. The intellectual property challenge. The concept of intellectual property is one of the most contentious concerns surrounding big data. To begin, we must define intellectual property in its most fundamental form. There are numerous definitions available, but in general, intellectual property refers to human mind creations such as inventions, literary and creative works, and commercially utilized symbols, names, images, and designs. Although this is a broad definition, it captures the core of intellectual property. With big data combining various types of private, public, corporate, and government data into a massive data bank, there are certain to be pieces of IP or intellectual property in the mix, ranging from simple elements like images to more complex parts like patent applications or technical schematics. Intellectual property rules. Number 1, understand what IP is and know what you have to protect. Prioritize protection, label, and of course, lock it up. Understand what IP is and know what you have to protect. If all employees understand what needs to be protected, they can better understand how to protect it and whom to protect it from. Doing that requires that those charged with IP security in IT, usually a computer security officer or CSO, must communicate on an ongoing basis with the executives who oversee intellectual capital. This may require meeting at least quarterly with the chief executive, operating and information officers, and representatives from HR, marketing, sales, legal services, production, and research development. Corporate leaders will be the foundation for protecting IP. Prioritize protection. The chief security officer with extensive experience normally recommend doing a risk and cost-benefit analysis. This may require you to create a map of your company's assets and determine what information, if lost, would hurt your company the most. Then consider which of those assets are most at risk of being stolen. Putting these two factors together should help you figure out where to best allocate your protective efforts. Label. Confidential information should be labeled appropriately. If company data are proprietary, note that on every login screen. This may sound trivial, but in court you may have to prove that someone who was not authorized to take information had been informed repeatedly. Your argument won't stand up if you can't demonstrate that you made this clear. Lock it up. Physical as well as digital protection schemes are a must. Rooms that store sensitive data should be locked. This applies to everything from the server farm to the file room. Keep track of who has the keys. Always use complex passwords and limit employee access to important databases. Educate employees. Awareness training can be effective for plugging and preventing IP leaks, but it must be targeted to the information that a specific group of employees needs to guard. Talk in specific terms about something that engineers or scientists have invested a lot of time in, and they will pay attention. Humans are often the weakest link in the defense chain. This is why an IP protection effort that counts on firewalls and copyrights but ignores employee awareness and training is doomed to fail. Know your tools. A growing variety of software tools are available for tracking documents and other IP stores. The category of data loss protection or data leakage prevention grew quickly in the middle of the first decade of this century and now shows signs of consolidation into other security tool sets. Those tools can locate sensitive documents and keep track of how they are being used and by whom. Use a holistic approach. Communication gaps between info security and corporate security divisions can be quite dangerous. IP protection necessitates connectivity and communication among all organizational activities. The legal department as well as HR, IT, R&D engineering, and graphic design must all play a role in IP protection. Think holistically, both to protect and to detect. Use a counterintelligence mindset. Thinking about match approaches will inspire you to explore safeguarding phone lists, shredding papers in recycling bins, convening an internal council to review the publications of your research and development scientists, and coming up with other worthwhile suggestions for your own business. These guidelines can be applied to almost any information security paradigm that is geared toward protecting IP. The same guidelines can be used when designing IP protection for a big data platform.